It was a June day in Genoa, Italy. St. Christopher's Day was almost here. One red-haired boy of 9 was counting the days until its celebration. Seated on a shady courtyard step just outside the weaving room door of his father's house, he was dreaming over the miracle of the giant saint for whom he, Cristoforo Colombo, had been named. This morning, as usual, Christopher was carding wool. With a sharp brush he was cleaning dirty, tangled pieces, combing the fibers straight and letting the small twigs and burrs drop between his bare feet. The wool would then be ready for spinning into yarn. Bartholomew, his younger brother, sat beside him. As little Bartholomew was just learning to card, he kept running inside for their mother's approval. Each time Christopher heard the noisy clatter of the loom stop for a moment, then begin again louder and faster as his busy mother, Susanna, picked up her shuttles and resumed her weaving. A certain length of material had to be delivered by nightfall. Domenico, the master weaver himself, had went off an hour or so before and disappeared down the street. By now, no doubt, he and his friends were discussing the last or next meeting of the Clothiers' Guild, why selling wine and cheeses might not be more profitable than weaving, or some other one of their favorite topics. Drawn out and enlivened by many glasses of wine, the day might be far spent and his ready coins gone before the sociable master weaver returned home. But on St. Christopher's Day, the boy knew his good-hearted father would think only of him, his oldest son, and of helping celebrate the feast day of his patron saint, and might even have a few coins in his pocket for a present. In honor of the day, there would be a high mass at the cathedral, and the family would be going. To enter the cathedral on any day was like entering another world. How mysterious the silence was when the church was almost empty, with only a few souls kneeling there in prayer. How marvelous and beautiful it would be on St. Christopher's Day when the priest chanted the high mass. The music, incense, flickering candles, the procession of priests in gold-embroidered robes, carrying the cross to the altar bearing the crucifix. Christ-bearer, the boy thought. That was what his name, Christopher, actually meant in Greek. Christ-bearer. He stopped working, holding the brushes and wool loosely between his knees, and sat gazing across the courtyard, thinking over again this miraculous, wonderful legend of Saint Christopher. In the beginning, Christopher, a very strong man, had been a servant to the king of his country, but he wasn't happy. He wished to serve a master who was stronger than he, and fearful of no one. So he left the king to serve the devil, because the king was fearful of the devil. Then he found the devil was in fear of the cross. So he left serving the devil and set out to find and serve him whose symbol was the cross, the Lord Christ. On his way he encountered a holy hermit. "Fast and pray," the hermit told him, "and perhaps the Lord Christ will show himself to you." "I cannot fast," said Christopher, "and I do not know how to pray. Is there nothing else that I can do?" "Do you know," said the hermit, "that wide river which has no bridge, and which people cannot cross without fear of drowning?" Christopher nodded. He knew the river. "Go there, then," said the hermit. "Build your cabin by the river's bank. Live there and carry travelers across the deep water on your broad shoulders." Christopher did as the hermit said. One night, asleep in his cabin, he heard a child crying, "Christopher, Christopher, come, carry me across." The giant rose, took up the tree trunk he used for a staff, lifted the small child to his shoulders, and waded into the river. At every step the child's weight grew heavier, until the man was barely able to stagger across to the far bank. "Ah," he said, "if I had the whole world on my back, it could not have been heavier than thou." "Marvel not," the child replied, "for thou hast borne upon thy back the whole world, and him who created it. I am Christ. Thou servest me in doing good." This story would have been one of the first one that little Christopher of Genoa ever heard. In what we now know as Spain, on a day in the year 1462, a small boy of 9, astride a high-stepping white horse, and a blonde, blue-eyed girl of 11, seated on a lowly mule, were riding side by side out of a little walled town called Isabella. They were leaving behind them the only home they could remember. The boy was Alfonso, Prince of Castile, and the blonde, blue-eyed girl who sat so straight and rode with such dignity on the humble mule was his sister Isabella. Escorted by a small cavalcade of messengers and retainers, they were on their way to Madrid to the court of their half-brother, Henry IV, who was King of Castile. Why their brother, the king, had suddenly sent for them, the children did not know. His word to their mother had been that they would be better educated at court. At the thought of what their education might be at her stepson's vile court, the queen mother had dissolved into tears. They would be ruined, her 2 pure, lovely children whom she had raised so carefully. Why, but to save them from such evil, had she left court when their father died? Why else had she brought them, baby Alfonso and little Isabella, to live in this old fortress castle, though it was no fit residence for a queen? An ancient run-down alcazar, deserted by the Moors, with broken tiles and rusty iron bars. She had wept at the sight of it, her tears mingling with those she shed in mourning for her husband, the king. The sad queen scarcely ever ceased weeping, except to pray, teaching her little daughter to pray as she did, spending long hours on her knees. Her mother's constant melancholy distressed Isabella. On this day of farewell, it had been hard for her to leave her mother in tears as they rode away. But soon the little walled town lay flat behind them, and Isabella was wondering what lay ahead. What did the future hold? What did her brother, the king, plan to do with her? Would he have her wed the prince of some foreign country and become its queen? If so, what country? Aragon, perhaps. Maybe Portugal? That she might ever be queen of her own country, Castile, did not enter her mind. There was no reason for Isabella to think that she would ever inherit the throne. Someday Alfonso would become king of Castile if Henry, their brother, died without having a child. Henry was nearly 40 years old. He had had 2 wives, but so far no child. Some people said he could not have one. But so many strange and horrible things were said about the king, they could not all be true. Isabella did not remember Henry, but he was her brother, and she made up her mind to love him if she could. Little as she expected to be Queen of Castile, much less could Isabella have imagined ever being Queen of Spain, because no nation existed yet. The country later spoken of as Spain was then divided into 4 independent quarreling nations: Castile, Navarre, Aragon, and Granada. Granada belonged to the Moors and would remain in their possession for many years to come, until 1492 to be exact. That year, just before she agreed to fund Columbus, Isabella was to conquer Granada and unite the parts of Spain into a nation, which was to become the richest nation in Europe. The children traveled on, reached Madrid, passed through gates and the door of the royal palace, and soon stood on the threshold of a strange new life. The king had left orders that upon arrival they were to be dressed and groomed like other fashionable children at the court, so the ladies in waiting began at once to help them out of their dusty traveling clothes. After Isabella had been bathed and perfumed, her hair was combed and restyled. Then came out a beautiful new gown. Isabella was enchanted. She whirled about in the full rustling skirt of heavy blue silk, swung its long pointed sleeves to show the crimson lining, and stood admiring her image in the mirror. How different she looked! Not like herself at all. She touched her forehead where her hair had been shaved back to make her face look long and narrow in the latest fashion. All that dark powder around her eyes made them look large. She was fascinated. For days thereafter she spent it gazing at herself in the mirror until she was struck with conscience. She had become vain. Overwhelmed with remorse, she rushed to her father confessor, admitted her sin, and did penance. If love of beautiful clothes can be called a sin, it was one which Isabella acquired. Other than that, her mother needed have no fear that she would be ruined by the evils of the court. Isabella remained unspoiled, just as she came. At the same time, she observed what was going on about her, storing up for future use all that she learned about the ways of the people.